Who, what, when, where, why, and how is critical to proving the truth. More at terrellhogan.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect with Melissa Ross. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
Controversy over the makeup of a Georgia jury. I'm Melissa Ross, and just ahead this hour on First Coast Connect, 11 of the 12 jurors selected in the trial of the men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery are white. We'll have the latest. Also, why undercounting Jacksonville's homeless population could be due to the pandemic. Then later.
We were there to see the work that NOAA does along with FWC, Florida Wildlife and Conservation Commission.
Saving the right whales that calve off our North Florida coast. All of that and more is just ahead. After the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The Biden administration has released the details of new COVID-19 vaccine requirements that are estimated to cover 100 million workers. It's a key part of President Biden's efforts to get more Americans vaccinated against the disease. NPR's Andrea Hsu has more.
The administration is rolling out 2 rules simultaneously. The first one from OSHA, the Federal Workplace Safety Agency, is aimed at some 84 million workers at private companies. Employers must ensure that their workers are fully vaccinated by January 4th of next year, or that they produce negative COVID tests at least once a week. Companies must pay workers for the time it takes to get vaccinated, but they are not required by OSHA to pay for testing for workers who decline the vaccines. The second rule applies to some 17 million workers in hospitals, nursing homes, and other healthcare settings. Those workers must get vaccinated by January 4th with no option to test instead. Andrea Hsu, NPR News.
Congressional Democrats in the House say they hope to vote as soon as today on a major $1.75 trillion spending bill. It contains many of President Biden's domestic policy goals. House Democrats also want to move on a separate $1 trillion infrastructure bill. NPR's Windsor Johnston says Biden himself is urging lawmakers to act.
The president says Democrats need to produce for the American people, adding that voters are concerned about the pandemic, schools, jobs, and the rising price of gas. Biden has been pushing his party for weeks to come to an agreement on his now $1.7 trillion social spending plan. The legislative package includes provisions to lower prescription drug prices and reduce the cost of child care.
NPR's Windsor Johnston reporting. A trial will resume today in Wisconsin for a man charged with killing 2 people during protests in Kenosha last year and wounding another. On Wednesday, prosecutors showed multiple videos of Kyle Rittenhouse fatally shooting the 2 men and wounding the third. From member station WUWM, Chuck Quirmbach reports.
Independent journalists and social media bloggers took several videos of the shootings. Prosecutor Thomas Binger played one that showed Rittenhouse repeatedly firing at the first person he killed, protester Joseph Rosenbaum. Shortly after playing the videos, Binger asked witness and Kenosha Police Detective Martin Howard if there was any indication Rosenbaum was armed.
So no gun?
No.
No knife?
No.
No bat?
No.
No club?
No.
Rittenhouse's attorney argues Rosenbaum had tried to take his client's rifle and that Rittenhouse feared for his life. For NPR News, I'm Chuck Quirmbach in Kenosha.
You're listening to NPR News.
Good morning, 4 minutes after 9. This is WJCT News 89.9.
Florida is facing a shortage of mental health counselors. Carla Sapp works with the Florida Counseling Association and says that shortage comes as the need for mental health support is growing.
As highlighted by the opioid epidemic, the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, and rural health care disparities.
Doral Republican Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez is pushing a bill she says would make it easier for counselors to move to Florida or to work remotely with clients in the state. Under her measure, Florida would join the Professional Counselors Licensure Compact. A poll released today by UNF and the Tributary finds Jacksonville voters have greater trust in local news compared to national news. UNF's Public Opinion Research Lab poll asked how much respondents trust the information from national news organizations. 60% said they trust them either a lot or some, while 40% responded with not too much or not at all. When it comes to local news, 75% of respondents trusted outlets, either some or a lot. 24% said they did not trust the information provided. As for which local news respondents rely upon most, our partner News4JAX had the highest response with 37%, the Florida Times-Union 12%, and WJCT News 11%. 60 degrees in Jacksonville, and it's mostly cloudy, a high near 69 for this afternoon.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Norton LifeLock, reminding consumers there was a victim of identity theft every 3 seconds in 2020. Learn more at lifelock.com/NPR. And the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
A controversial jury selection in Georgia, and how to help this city's homeless if you can't accurately count how many people there are. Good morning. We're live from Studio 5. I'm Melissa Ross, and this is First Coast Connect. Thanks for listening. Lots to talk about this hour. A little later, we'll tell you why the pandemic is causing an undercount of Jacksonville's homeless population. Plus, the endangered right whale, how the First Coast is working to save this species as a new film about the right whale debuts. All of that and more ahead. But first this hour, our top story. 11 of the 12 jurors selected in the trial of the men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia, are white. So jury selection in Brunswick, Georgia is now complete after a long and contentious process. But the reaction to the racial makeup of the jurors is spreading across the country this morning. In Glynn County, more than 26% of residents are black and about 69% are white. Ann Schindler of First Coast News is covering the trial and joins us now. Hi, Ann.
Good morning, Melissa. How are you?
Great to talk to you. So tell us about this. The judge in the case says he believes that there was intentional discrimination in this panel of 12 people chosen Wednesday, but the trial is still going forward?
It was a really surprising statement from him, I thought, and obviously that's kind of the soundbite that's made headlines. He went on to say that there are limits on what a judge can do in terms of writing discriminatory juror strikes. He said, the law provides for an argument, a counter argument from whoever is being challenged on the juror strike. In this case, it was the defendants who'd stricken most of the black jurors. They're allowed to present additional reasons why this person is not a qualified juror. And they presented some very strong biases that these jurors had expressed, some very strong statements that they'd made. And given that, that's sort of what the law allows. I mean, there's a challenge, there's an opportunity to present additional countervailing, reasons why you would have stricken somebody, legitimate reasons that are not race, which is not a legal strike. And at that point, it's up to the judge to decide if this juror has nothing else besides race. Presumably, they could reverse the strike. But in this case, they really did have a lot of very strong, compelling statements that these potential jurors had made, revealing bias. And so the judge basically said, this case is infused with race. It has been from the beginning. It will continue to be a big part of this case. And this is just kind of another instance of where it is playing a role.
Sure. I mean, three white men are accused of gunning down and killing Ahmaud Arbery, a black man who was just out jogging in Brunswick, Georgia. The video capturing part of this killing went viral, which has caused the national focus. And so Ahmaud's mother said she's shocked. She's devastated to see that there is only one black juror who will decide the fate of these men. How much skepticism is there in Glenn County that this will be a fair trial?
Well, I'll tell you what I look at as somebody who's been sitting through the entire jury selection process is that it's not just the racial strikes, but in fact, the totality of the strikes in this case really leaves you with a jury of a slim minority of the people that were interviewed, which is people who really don't have a position on the video or the guilt of the defendants. Overwhelmingly, people came into this jury selection process saying they thought they were guilty, they thought what they did was wrong, and they thought that what they did was racist. And the jury that you have doesn't express those views. I was going back through all their juror profiles this morning because I've got a story up that basically summarizes, what they said about the case in each of their interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And they pretty much have all said, to larger or lesser degree, that they just haven't formed an opinion, which is unusual, certainly in that place and among all of the hundreds of people questioned.
Lots of tweets. Here's one from one listener. I refuse to believe they could not find more diversity than that among those eligible for jury duty. Someone else tweets the show, they should have moved the trial to a larger, more diverse city. Was change of venue considered, Anne, given that it would be really hard in Brunswick, Georgia, to find anyone in that jury pool who was completely unbiased about this case?
The feeling of the defense attorneys when we asked them about it again and again was, it's going to be the same anywhere. This is a national, international case. Everybody's seen the video. And there wasn't going to be, certainly there'd be fewer people that actually knew the defendants, which became an issue in this case. But in terms of straight up bias, their feeling was it's not going to be better anywhere else. And I'll tell you, Brunswick is a diverse city. There's certain parts you go to, like the islands, that are not, but the town of Brunswick is a pretty diverse place. And they had, a fair amount of originally, beginning with the process, had a fair amount of diversity on the overall pool. But obviously the final panel of prospective jurors that made it through that initial questioning, there was 65 of them and there was only 12 people of color. And there were no Asians, there were no Latinos. There was, this was, just kind of black and white. And I can't remember what this started.
Right. Julie tweets the show, striking so many black jurors for various causes smacks of pretext for discrimination. Here's hoping the prosecutor can do something about it. What's the prosecutor's reaction to this jury panel, Anne?
They raised the challenge in the first place. It's called a Batson challenge. In this case, it's called a McCullough challenge because it's brought up by the prosecution and not the defense. But they said this is clearly a discriminatory series of strikes. And not just the strikes, but the prosecutor, Linda Dymkowski, said, well, they questioned these jurors so much more intently than they questioned white jurors about the same things. We weren't asking white female jurors, how did you talk to your children about this case? And what did you tell them? And, which is a fair point, right? They didn't. But the defense attorney, Linda Hogue, responded to that. And she said, look, this is actually not dissimilar from, say, a rape case, in which case we would be questioning female panelists or potential jurors more intently about possibly their experience, their feelings about that crime, because it is a personal trauma that affects them in a different way. And so she was saying, yeah, we are going to be questioning Black panelists more intently about this because it is a trauma that affects them in a different way. It's something that they've personally experienced, racism. And so, she was basically defending that more intensive questioning, but the prosecution said that was part of the reason that they were teasing out additional biases, is they're taking all this time with every Black juror to kind of find those biases. So
interesting. Let's go to Carnell on the north side. He has a comment about the jury in the trial of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. Carnell, go ahead.
Hello, how's everyone doing today?
Great. Go ahead.
Look, my personal opinion on this particular situation is that it's the institution in itself that is oppressive. A lot of our laws are outdated in every sense of the way that creates that divide instead of bringing us together. This whole argument that the judge has issued based on he found discrimination, but the foundation of the institution of white privilege is the problem at hand. And I hope that this discussion can be something that can create change. And that's my statement.
Okay, Carnell, thank you for that. So, Ann Schindler, when do opening arguments get underway? What's the next phase of action in the courtroom?
A lot of housekeeping matters, getting through, there's some additional motions that are pending that the judge has to hear and make a decision on. Opening statements set to begin tomorrow at 9. Of course, everything in this case has been a little bit on a modified schedule, but I'll actually be in court. I'm going to be a pool reporter tomorrow, so I should be there for the opening statements. They're expecting that those will take about an hour for each defendant. Typically those take about, half an hour for in a case, but it looks like we're going to have several hours of that presentation. And that might be all we get to on that first day, truly. It just sort of depends. The judge has said he wants to basically do a 9 to 5 schedule, not have these late nights like we've been having throughout jury selection. He kind of assured jurors that that's not going to be a thing. But, this was slated for 2 weeks and expected to start, this past Monday. And obviously it's going to start Friday. So this 2-week trial now obviously going to push well past next week.
Ann Schindler of First Coast News. She's our eyes and ears in the courtroom in Brunswick, Georgia, in this nationally watched murder trial. So great to have you on, as always. Thank you, Ann, so much.
Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate it.
Now, our other big story of the day. The pandemic is apparently making it harder for Jacksonville to figure out just how many homeless people there are on streets and people who need shelter. It's called the Point in Time Count, measuring the city's homeless population. Dawn Gilman is CEO of Changing Homelessness, who oversees these efforts, and she is on the line with this big story of the week. Hi, Dawn.
Hey, Melissa, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks. So good to talk to you. And as we talk about homelessness in Jacksonville, give us a call, everyone, 549-2937. So tell us what's going on with the Point in Time Count, which helps us figure out how many unsheltered people there are in the city.
Okay, so many of your listeners have probably heard you discuss this in previous years. Every January in our community, the third Wednesday in January, in a normal year, we recruit between 150 and 200 volunteers, and we do both a sheltered count, which is within the homeless shelters in our community, and an unsheltered count, and that's where those volunteers go out across Duval, Clay, and Nassau counties. They look for and talk to folks that are experiencing homelessness, and that gives us an idea of how many people in our community are homeless on any given day. For January 2021, it was a very different year. It was from COVID. It was not a normal year for a point-in-time count. We actually had the option not to do an unsheltered count. We felt it was really important to at least attempt to get a gauge of what was happening throughout our community. So we modified our point-in-time count for this past year using only service providers. Those were people that were already interacting with folks that were homeless. We felt that was the best way to both get that count and not spread COVID amongst different community members that may not have been exposed previously.
So then, do we have an accurate count?
So let's talk about accurate. We're looking for people that are moving around who do not have a fixed place to stay. They are homeless. They are unsheltered, meaning they're not in a shelter or transitional housing. They're folks that are sleeping out of doors or in the rough, as it's called in different places. So I don't know that any community has fully ever been able to do 100% accurate enumeration of everyone on that particular night that is homeless. So we did our best to get a gauge. What we were really looking for, or some of the things we were looking for, is what was the difference in trends? Were we seeing more people that were first-time homeless, or were most of the folks people that were known to the system, meaning they were already homeless prior to the pandemic starting, and they had not found housing yet? So that was one of our big things that we were looking for.
So if we're seeing an undercount because of the way the pandemic skewed things, and there are more homeless people out there or people at risk of homelessness, they're sort of under the radar. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, about the needs that people have, and the city's efforts to reduce homelessness? Because, of course, you're involved with that, and so are a number of other agencies.
Sure. So Changing Homelessness is the lead agency in Duval Clay and Nassau County for homelessness. So think of us as a lead agency or a backbone agency working with all those other agencies that are working to prevent and end homelessness in our community. So far, from what our data is showing to date, there is a tremendous increase in people that are at risk of eviction, but we have not seen that same tremendous increase in people who are actually experiencing homelessness, meaning that they have been evicted and they don't have any place to go, no friends or family, no other place that they can stay in for a while until they get things resorted back out. So I think part of that is coming from, there was the eviction moratorium. There has been a tremendous amount of money through the Treasury for helping folks get current with rent and mortgage assistance. And then we have also, in the homeless community, gotten money through the CARES Act to do something to provide more assistance to folks who are literally homeless. If anyone does go to our website, which is changinghomelessness.org, you can go under reports and see this year's full point-in-time report. You'll notice that we break out sheltered and unsheltered. The sheltered count is almost the same as it was last year, even though all of our shelters had reduced capacity in January. And that is because we were able to increase shelter capacity through non-congregate shelter. And that was the hotel-motel programs, that we are able to rent rooms from various hotels throughout our community, so folks who could not access shelter did have a safe place to stay.
Can you talk a little bit about that? The move in recent years has been rapid rehousing, which just honestly seems like common sense. Get people housed. There are so many misconceptions about who is homeless and why they're homeless that I think has delayed that response. What are the biggest misconceptions or beliefs people have about homeless people that you can shed some light on?
Well, I think that the important thing is, even throughout the pandemic, 30 to 50% of the folks that we're serving work, right? They work, but they do not earn enough to find a place to rent. And that is really showing up in our rapid rehousing data, just the lack and stress on affordable housing in our community. Prior to the pandemic, it took us about 63 days on average for a person who was enrolled in a rapid rehousing program to sign a lease and move in. Since the pandemic has started, in the last 12 months, that is now up to 89 days. So that means it's not that there is a lack, there's no change. There's actually been an increase in the funding to assist people with things like deposits and temporary rental assistance, utility assistance. It's just taking longer because the units are harder and harder to find throughout our community.
That's the larger issue, isn't it, Dawn? And it affects so many people who are housed, but who can barely afford their housing.
Exactly. There are a lot of national nonprofits out there who have some great reports out just on the general increase in the percentage of a family's or household's income that needs to be spent to maintain the housing. Locally in Northeast Florida, we used to say a living wage, which is a one-person household working 40 hours a week. How much do they need to earn an hour to rent a place? It was $15 an hour. It's now up to $20 an hour. And that's just the open market increase in rent throughout our community. So again, it's becoming harder for people to be able to maintain that housing, meaning the more they have to put into their housing, the less they're able to have for other things that they need, whether it be medical care, food, if they have an unexpected car repair, things like that can really put people in a bind and put their housing at jeopardy.
Isn't the rule that you shouldn't spend more than a third of your income on housing? I just don't think that's the case for most people, even though that's supposed to be the standard.
That is the HUD standard, and that is not the case, especially, and that's not just for families that would be considered below the area median income. That's for a lot of families across the income spectrum. I'm sure your viewers have noticed, whether they rent or they own, that other single-family homes, apartments, condominiums, townhomes in the neighborhood are now selling and renting for significantly more than they were pre-2020. And that is something, as a community, we need to figure out how are we going to invest to make sure we have housing for people at all sorts of price points throughout our neighborhood.
There have been efforts in recent years to build more affordable housing communities. There are a few downtown and some other places. So it's not as though there are none, but we need more, right, Dawn?
Correct. And it's not just 100% like to build an affordable housing community. There's different ways if we can decide as a community if we are going to give incentives to build any kind of new housing. How can there also be a mix of more affordable housing within that development? How can we incentivize private developers so there is the profit margin that they need to stay in business to build more housing and deeply affordable housing? The more that we're able to do, the better our community will be. It allows all of us a safe place to live, work, play, to enjoy our neighborhoods.
Now, with all of that said, you are using a new app, a new tool to record surveys about the homeless.
Correct.
Counting Us. Tell us about that. So there's an app for everything now, including this.
There are actually multiple apps for this. This is just the one that we chose. In previous years, there was a lot of time and effort spent doing data input after the fact, meaning we would go out with paper forms, everyone would fill them out, then we'd collect all those forms back. And that's why it would often take a very long time for us to actually even get a sense of the data. When we use the app, all that is automatically put into a database. So it's just more data cleanup and data analysis for us on the back end. We had a few quirks with it the first time that we were doing it, so we're going to work on making sure that we move questions up that we really need answered. Because in any survey, people will, if they're willing to answer the survey, they'll probably go through the first couple of questions, but not everybody will go all the way through to the end. So we're trying to make sure that whatever information is most important for our community to get, that we have that at the front end, so we're able to report out on that.
Always great to talk to you. Dawn Gilman, CEO of Changing Homelessness in Jacksonville. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Melissa. I appreciate it.
And much more still ahead. Later, we'll tell you how a Florida museum celebrating Gatorade, among other things, is now receiving international recognition. That's later, but up next.
We were there to see the work that NOAA does along with FWC, Florida Wildlife and Conservation Commission.
A new film spotlighting the danger to the North Atlantic right whales calving right off our coast and how you can be part of that effort right here in town. We'll be right back. Well, they are the most at-risk great whale on Earth. North Atlantic right whales are dying faster than they can reproduce. There's less than 400 of them left in the world. They could be extinct in the next 20 years. Now, these gentle giants no longer die of natural causes. Instead, they are run over by ships or they suffer lethal injuries from fishing gear. It's mainly caused by their disrupted migration patterns. Those patterns have been thrown off due to climate change. Now, the new award-winning Canadian film, Last of the Right Whales, tells the story of a group of allies determined to stop the world's first great whale extinction. Much of it was shot right here in our area, in the calving grounds of right whales right off the coast of North Florida. Excerpts from this film will be shown this weekend at the Amelia Island Right Whale Festival. I got a preview from the project's producer and director, Nadine Pequenitsa. Here's that conversation. Hi, Nadine. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Melissa. I appreciate it.
So tell us about this film and how much of it you actually did here in Florida, right?
Yeah, well, it started in Florida, actually, and we were there for 2 calving seasons in 2020 and 2021. And it's really where the story begins. You know, as Barb Zuidsma says in the film, this is where their conservation begins. It's the only known calving ground for North Atlantic right whales. And so we were there to see, the work that NOAA does along with FWC, Florida Wildlife and Conservation Commission, and also working with DNR, so the Georgia Conservation Organization. And really what they're trying to do is document the number of calves that are being born each year. And if they can, they're trying to get samples, biopsy samples, so that they can keep a close watch on the trajectory of the population, because right now there's only about 336 of these animals left. That was the latest count that came out of the consortium that was just held up here in Canada about a month ago. And so these animals are really fighting for their survival. So the work that's happening off the coast of Florida is very important.
Right. People, of course, love to spot the right whales here in Jacksonville off our coast. But what you've done is you've filmed their migration from their calving grounds off our coast all the way up north where you are in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So we learn a lot about this species, their migration patterns, and also what's threatening them, because they're dying faster than they can reproduce.
That's right. That's right. So we really wanted to look at that range because there was a traumatic event in 2017. We lost 17 North Atlantic right whales in the space of that year, mostly over the course of the summer when they were migrating north into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And so they didn't used to come that far north. They used to sort of stop around the Bay of Fundy, which is close to Nova Scotia. But because of climate change, the distribution of their food, the plankton, the copepods that they eat, is being redistributed in the ocean because of warming waters. And so they're having to go further north in order to find the food that they need to survive. And that's put them into areas where there's a lot of ship traffic and it's a heavily fished area. And normally protections are in place to try to stop collisions with ships. You know, these are the 2 main causes of death now for North Atlantic right whales. It's either they're hit by ships. And when I say ships, it can be anything from a boat, a recreational fishing boat, to a big container ship or an oil tanker. And the other leading cause of death is entanglement in fishing gear. And so both of those activities are taking place in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And it really took people by surprise to see the whales there. They weren't prepared for it. But now, since then, the government has put in place fishing closures while the whales are there, and also speed restrictions for the ship traffic moving through the area. And these two measures have proven to be very effective in reducing the risks to right whales. But, the challenge is that whales obviously move around, and especially with climate change, their distribution is shifting. And so scientists are trying to stay on top of that and working with regulators both in the United States and Canada to make sure that the protection measures necessary are in place to prevent these deaths.
Right. Your film really frames the right whale as a metaphor for the problems facing the sea, the threats to our oceans through the prism of climate change and how that threatens us all. And so what is the solution? How can we protect this species and then in so doing protect the oceans overall?
Yeah, well, I think, Melissa, the way you phrase the question is the answer, really. We have to look at the health of the oceans and how climate change is impacting not just the right whale, but all marine mammals and all life in the ocean. And it's interesting when you think about it, because these great whales, they're 60 tons, and they're up to 50 feet, 60 feet long, and they feed on these tiny organisms in the water, these crustaceans called copepods. And it really shows you how connected the ocean is. And that plankton, those copepods exist in plankton, that actually supplies, almost 50% of the world's oxygen. And so all of these things are interconnected. And the whales, I think it's Stormy Mayo, you quoted him in your question, they are really a metaphor for what's happening to the ocean. And we have to pay attention because protecting those whales as well, they're part of that ecosystem. So their defecation, the fact that they feed up to 200 meters below the ocean surface, they actually work as eco-engineers. So they're bringing a lot of nutrients to the surface that sustains the plankton, that sustains our planet, the oxygen. It's all so interconnected and important that we really need to pay attention to it.
Now, your film is not being released in the U.S. theatrically until next year, but the 2021 Right Whale Festival is set for this weekend on Amelia Island. So that's an opportunity for people to learn about these beautiful animals, right?
That's right. The festival's been going on for a number of years, and they always get a healthy turnout. And it's interesting. The organizer of the festival was telling me that every year, 50% of the people there, because they do a lot of surveys and talking to people, but every year 50% have never heard of the North Atlantic right whale, which tells us that there's a lot of education still to be done. And education always sounds like a chore. There's a lot of joy to be spread in getting to know these animals, and I hope that's what people see in the film, because they're so rare. There's so few of them left. And obviously there's protection measures around them as well. So in the United States, you're not supposed to approach within 500 yards of a North Atlantic right whale. In Canada, it's 100 meters. But they need that protective bubble. So it's very hard to see these whales. So if you go to the festival, there's a lot of great information about them, behavioral information, how they are related to each other, because scientists have been studying them for so long that they know entire family trees. You'll see in the film there's a grandmother who was killed, but who had several calves and grandcalves. And so this kind of closeness that the people in my film have with the whales is really apparent. And that's the kind of the kind of intimate information you can get about right whales if you go to the festival. And of course, we're going to be showing some excerpts from the film, of the filming that we did in Florida. And on the panel with us are going to be some people from IFAW who are working on an outreach campaign with us. So when the film does release next year in the United States, we're going to do a lot of panel discussions at these screenings so that people can see and learn about, can see and learn about the right whale.
Well, enjoy your time on Amelia Island, and we look forward to the release of the film here in the U.S. next year. Nadine Pequaniza, producer-director of the award-winning Last of the Right Whales. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Melissa.
Now, also this weekend, the city of Jacksonville and Keep Jacksonville Beautiful will host the 13th annual Right Whale Beach Cleanup. It's this Saturday from 8 to 10 a.m. Volunteer check-in at the Seawalk Pavilion in Jacks Beach. The cleanup celebrates the North Atlantic right whale's yearly return to their only known calving area in the southeast U.S., right off our shores. Again, the species is highly endangered, and these are really easy local efforts anyone can join to be part of the solution. Well, for the first time ever, the U.S. may top 100,000 overdose deaths in a single 12-month period. A big culprit here is black market fentanyl. It's a powerful synthetic opiate, and it now contaminates most street drugs. Dr. Lanti Jaranbi is Chief Medical Officer at Lakeview Health in Jacksonville, and she's on the line. Doctor, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
So good to talk to you. So addiction and substance abuse in general has been on the rise all during the COVID pandemic. The numbers are higher than ever now. And at Lakeview Health, you say one of the main causes is the spread of fentanyl. Tell us what you're seeing.
Well, fentanyl, if people hear about fentanyl, and a lot of them might be familiar that it is actually a prescribed FDA-approved drug for pain and for certain post-surgical conditions. But what we're seeing within the last year, and really it has been a rise over the last several years, is fentanyl that is basically illicit. And in the last 6 months to 12 months with COVID, what we're seeing is that there are enterprising labs, chemical labs that are based in China that are creating fentanyl that's much more potent than the fentanyl that we're familiar with. And they are getting this fentanyl into the United States. It's being spread through drug dealers or drug cartels. And we're even seeing this particular very potent fentanyl laced into other drugs. So people that usually get their drugs from off the streets, per se, they are getting things such as maybe methamphetamine that's laced with fentanyl, or other drugs that are laced with fentanyl. And this very potent fentanyl can be very dangerous. It's very deadly and potent.
And can you talk a little bit about how the pandemic has worsened this whole crisis?
I think what we've seen with the pandemic is that COVID has exposed a lot of the fault lines that existed in both our mental health structure in the United States and both also for substance use treatment. So previous to COVID, people were really struggling already. We were seeing people dying of suicides. We were seeing high overdose deaths already. And then when you add COVID in, the risks with infection, the risks or the damage that came from economic instability and just a general overall uncertainty, people were in lockdown or quarantine. It really caused a great stress to those environments that people were living in. They were struggling with high anxiety, struggling with depression. Many lost their jobs. Many lost that social network that they depended on for stability. And all of this has escalated. We have seen here at Lakeview tremendous increases in people relapsing who have had several years of recovery. And because possibly they lost their job or they had to work from home and there was great stress there. And so they're coming in for treatment, or they're not even making it to treatment. They're dying from overdose. So it's really a crisis that we're at right now.
And how is that impacting treatment centers like Lakeview Health, where you're located, and also people seeking help for their addictions?
Well, one of the things, unfortunately, we've seen is that people are hesitant to go into treatment. And I think a lot of it is this fear of infection. They're afraid of catching COVID, leaving their house. And absolutely, that's a concern, and I wouldn't want to see anybody ignore that. But what we do know throughout the pandemic, both our facility and facilities across the country, we really instituted a lot of strong protocols that prevent a spread of infection. We've got testing. We actually provide vaccines. And so in my opinion, treatment is actually a much safer place to be than at home kind of mired in your addiction. And so the facilities that are open and safe are really one of the best places to go. And another thing to think about, too, is that research has shown people with mental health disorders and substance abuse disorders are actually at higher risk to get very sick if they were to contract COVID. So really getting those conditions treated and getting into a good facility, getting the right treatment, the right medications, the right support is really vital.
And of course, Lakeview Health is one of the preeminent facilities in our area helping people. But, cost is a real barrier. Insurance doesn't always cover the cost of all of the treatment that's needed, particularly if you do a residential stay. Not everyone has health insurance, too. So what about that?
We are seeing that, too. That is a struggle. Our insurance companies don't always, unfortunately, do the right thing. But, for instance, a big organization here in Jacksonville is Blue Cross, and they have partnered with a number of community organizations to really provide support for people that are struggling, especially from the opioid epidemic. So there's a lot of structure that they're putting into place within the community for people that may not be able to afford a residential program. There's good IOPs, which are outpatient intensive services. There's good PHP programming as well. So even though your insurance might not pay for a month and a half of residential, there are still good programs in place, including some of the programs that we have available too. We actually have PHP and IOPs. And I think as bad as COVID has been, as I mentioned, it has exposed the structural problems that we have as far as mental health and substance. And there's definitely an increased focus on improving those. Mm-hmm. So I feel going forward, I'm hopeful that we're going to see better services that are provided to the whole community and not just those fortunate few that have good insurance.
And then finally, the opiate epidemic really began its origins back in the 90s when pain started to be classified as the fifth vital sign when somebody was ill. And then, of course, bad actors like Purdue Pharma and others marketed these opiates to help any pain you might have without telling people about how addictive these medications are. And so for people who are in pain and they do need relief, it's much more difficult to get these medications for obvious reasons. But what are your thoughts about how to manage pain and how to avoid addiction?
So you're absolutely right. What we saw in the 1990s was just this real push to treat pain. And I think that doctors were duped into understanding or thinking that these things like oxycodone and OxyContin were safe, and we learned that they are far from safe and actually far from effective for chronic pain. One thing we did learn is that not only are these medications addictive, but they don't actually work that well. And people with chronic pain who were on something like OxyContin for years actually found that their pain increased. What I like about what we can do now and what we know about pain is that there are non-narcotic options, medications that help with different types of pain that are not addictive. We also know that mindfulness training and treating depression and mental health conditions can actually improve pain and pain perception. And working on the physical health of somebody. So, for instance, here at Lakeview, we provide physical therapists that can assess somebody's physical conditions, help them learn to move in different ways that aren't going to be scary, because people stop moving and stop being mobile because they're afraid of being in pain. So having that piece of it, having someone who's skilled in physical therapy who can give them a kind of an individualized plan for their physical health. Those all can be very, very helpful when you're addressing a chronic pain issue. Chronic pain is a much more complex situation than what we thought about in the 1990s.
By the way, the DEA launched a campaign recently, a nationwide campaign called One Pill Can Kill to combat the use of fentanyl. Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Dr. Alanti Jaranbi, Chief Medical Officer at Lakeview Health. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And in a moment, how a Gainesville museum is making international waves. That's next.
Announcing Vickers Landing at Oak Bridge, bridging retirees with an all-new Ponte Vedra Beach community featuring new homes, a resort lifestyle, and a life plan for every stage of aging. Information at vickerslanding.com. Congaree and Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpenn.com.
What's Jacksonville Today?
Jacksonville Today is growing.
Chaotic.
Creative. Jacksonville Today is hopeful.
Get the Jacksonville Today newsletter with the top local stories of the day, plus exclusive columns, a heads up on getting involved in local decision making, and the best of what's weird and wonderful in Northeast Florida. The Jacksonville Today newsletter. Sign up now at jaxtoday.org. That's jaxtoday.org.
WJCT Public Media is bringing you a new healthcare show, What's Health Got to Do with It? Our goal is to help you navigate all things health and healthcare and get you the answers you deserve. Join me, Dr. Joe Servin, Saturdays at 4 p.m. and Sundays at 9 p.m. on WJCT News 89.9. Sponsored in part by American Brain Foundation, Epilepsy Foundation, and Norellis.
The Remain in Mexico program is still around, despite President Biden trying to end it twice. The Trump-era policy forces some asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their cases are pending. Human rights advocates have called the policy inhumane, but supporters say it cuts down on illegal immigration. How long will Remain in Mexico remain in effect? Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, the director of the Cade Museum in Gainesville, Stephanie Bales, was just named a top international museum influencer. This is kind of a big deal, not only to see her hard work acknowledged, but also to see a Florida museum set up on an international list alongside world-class attractions like the Louvre and others. Now, one of the reasons Bales was awarded a place on this list is the Cade Museum's educational programming, including field trips and outreach that come into our area of Jacksonville. At the Cade, you can learn about the creation of Florida's iconic drink, Gatorade, but a whole lot more, too. I spoke with Stephanie Bales about the Cade Museum. Take a listen. Hi, Stephanie. Good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And congratulations. Lots of positive buzz around the Cade Museum. You've been named a top international museum influencer. That puts you in the same category as the Louvre in Paris and other world-class museums. So tell us a little bit more about the Cade Museum, because, of course, it is within driving distance of Jacksonville.
Yeah, well, first of all, it was an incredible honor to be selected as one of the 50 influencers this year in 2021. I think it's a testament to, you know, maybe a little bit of my work, but a lot of what goes on at the Cade. The Cade Museum is a relatively new museum located in Gainesville, Florida, right adjacent to Depot Park. And it is a museum where we teach creativity and innovation through the lens of invention.
Okay, and give me some examples of that. Paint a picture for us about what people might experience when they step inside your doors.
So the Cade Museum uses the story of the invention of Gatorade as kind of its starting point for the experiences that we offer in the museum. The invention of Gatorade was kind of happenstance. It was serendipitous, and it came out of a conversation that Dr. Cade, James Robert Cade, had with an assistant football coach at the University of Florida. And in that conversation, Dr. Cade was told about how the football players during the day would lose maybe 16 pounds as they were practicing, or pass out and end up in the infirmary. And during the course of the conversation, Dr. Cade, who was a kidney doctor and nephrologist, he kind of understood what was going on behind the scenes that was causing these, athletes to pass out or lose quite a bit of weight. And within about 6 weeks, he had developed an electrolyte replacement solution that they started testing on the team. And so, that's a long way of kind of answering your question, but it's really important about how invention happens and how big ideas come to life. Oftentimes you have to have a little bit of knowledge, and you have to have some experience, and you have to have a problem to solve before you start creating and inventing. And that's what we offer at the Cade Museum. We offer experiences, we offer an understanding of science knowledge and concepts, and then we give everyone who walks in the door, we give them the opportunity to solve problems and create and invent on their own.
Now, in the pandemic, like with so many other museums, you've shifted to virtual programming that anyone in Jacksonville can access. You've also sponsored field trips that some Jacksonville students have taken part in too. So you really do sort of have a footprint in Jacksonville as well, right?
We absolutely do. Our footprint actually extends as far south as Tampa, as far west as Pensacola, and we have South Georgia students come as well on field trips. We get kids from all over in person into the museum. And the great thing about our location is it can be a full day affair. Not only do parents and their families come in and have great, exciting hands-on experiences in the museum, but then when they're done, they can go outside into Depot Park and walk around the water features and go have lunch at the park or have a picnic. So it's a really great outing no matter where you're from.
And not too far away, as I mentioned, you're in Gainesville. And anyone wanting to take advantage of this can go online to cademuseum.org and check it out. And big congrats to you, Stephanie. Stephanie Bales is President and Executive Director of the Cade Museum for Creativity and Invention, named a top international museum influencer. Thanks so much for being with us, Stephanie.
Thank you, Melissa. We appreciate your time and your recognition, too.
And, of course, we've got plenty of great museums in Jacksonville, too. Check them all out. The Cummer Museum, the Mosh, the MoCA. Thank you, Josh Torres. I can't believe I had that momentary lapse of memory. Anyway, check out all of our museums. And thanks for listening. Our senior producer is Heather Schatz. Our director is Josh Torres, a multi-talented man. Catherine Hobbs is our associate producer. Our editorial director is Jessica Palumbo. Our news editor is Randy Roguski. We'll be back at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Have a great Thursday.
Support for First Coast Connect